What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Friday, January 27th. Thanks for being here, everyone. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at this 5-game NBA slate tonight. At the point guard position, one of the studs that I like on the slate is Ja Morant from the Memphis Grizzlies playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Ja Morant has averaged 48.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game, with a 36% usage rate. Now he's projected at 47.3 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 50 fantasy points or more in this matchup and get you 5 times value or more. He's 10,000 DraftKings salary, 200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 237.5 points scored in this game, and Ja Morant has scored 58 and 46 fantasy points in his last 2 games, playing 35 and 36 minutes. And he has a fantastic track record here versus the Timberwolves. Ja Morant has scored 41, 57, 47, 65, and 46 fantasy points in the last 5 games versus the Timberwolves. High scoring game, a good matchup, fantastic player versus team history. So I like Ja Morant here versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Another point guard that I like is Darius Garland from the Cleveland Cavaliers playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 7th worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing point guards. Darius Garland has averaged 40.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 27% usage rate. He's projected at 40.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's just about 5 times value. He's 8,300 DraftKings salary, 200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 222.5 points scored in this game. And Darius Garland has scored 55, 41, and 45 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 34, and 35 minutes. Now, even though this is a back-to-back, let's take a look at Darius Garland's score log here. Let's see when the last back-to-back he played. He played 40 minutes versus the Warriors, and then the next day, he played 35 minutes versus the Bucks, scored 45 fantasy points. So that back-to-back was somewhat recent. It was last week. Let's take a look at another back-to-back that he had here. The Pacers, that was when he got injured, so throw that one out. I just want to make sure that he's playing minutes on back-to-backs. Yeah, another one. The Kings played 35 minutes, and then versus the Thunder played 33 minutes. So it looks like he's playing plenty of minutes on back-to-backs. And Darius Garland has scored 30, 41, 63, 32, and 43 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Thunder. So I like Darius Garland here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Another point guard that I like is DAngelo Russell from the Minnesota Timberwolves playing the Memphis Grizzlies, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. DAngelo Russell has averaged 33.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. He's projected at 32.8 fantasy points here tonight, and that's just about 5 times value. He's 6,700 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 237.5 points scored in this game, and DAngelo Russell has scored 36, 49, and 39 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 38, 42, and 31 minutes. So this is a good matchup in a high-scoring game, in a fast-paced game, and he's been playing a lot of minutes and been outperforming his season average. So I like DAngelo Russell here versus the Memphis Grizzlies. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. I like Jordan Poole from the Golden State Warriors playing the Toronto Raptors, who have a good defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing shooting guards. Jordan Poole has averaged 33.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 30% usage rate. He's projected at 33 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 38 fantasy points or more. So let's just see what that value is. If he can reach 38 fantasy points, that would be 5.2 times value. He's 7,300 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. And Jordan Poole has scored 39, 37, and 41 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 30, 29, and 40 minutes. And I like this pick because Jordan Poole has scored 56 and 46 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Raptors, and he hasn't scored under 37 fantasy points in his last 5 games. And he's got two 40-point games and a 53 fantasy point game in there in the last 5 games. So he's been on fire, and good player versus team history here. So I like Jordan Poole here versus the Toronto Raptors.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And then we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Buddy Hield. Also eligible at the small forward position from the Indiana Pacers, playing the Milwaukee Bucks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing shooting guards, Buddy Hield has averaged 31.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate, and he's projected at 31.5 fantasy points here tonight. That's a hair under his season average, and that's 5.2 times value. He's 6,100 DraftKings salary, 700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 238 points scored in this game, and Buddy Hield has scored 43, 47, and 40 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 38, 38, and 35 minutes. And Buddy Hield has scored 35, 49, 20, 30, and 22 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Bucks. So I like Buddy Hield here versus the Milwaukee Bucks. Another shooting guard that I like, a value play here. Take a look at Dillon Brooks from the Memphis Grizzlies playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have the 11th worst defense overall, give up the 11th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Dillon Brooks has averaged 26.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 24% usage rate. He's projected at 26.2 fantasy points here tonight, and again, that's a hair under his season average, and that's 5.7 times value. Only 4,600 DraftKings salary, he's 800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 237.5 points scored in this game. I think this is a good way to get some low salary exposure to this Memphis Grizzlies team in this game. So Dillon Brooks has scored 23, 28, and 21 fantasy points in his last 3 games, and he played 30 minutes in each of those games. So he's averaging 0.88 fantasy points per minute on the season. And he scored 26, 26, 34, 21, and 32 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Timberwolves. So in 4 out of those 5 games, he would have got you well over 5 times value. So I like Dillon Brooks here versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. Stud on the slate that I like is Anthony Edwards from the Minnesota Timberwolves playing the Memphis Grizzlies, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, middle-of-the-pack defending opposing small forwards. Anthony Edwards has averaged 43.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 29% usage rate. Now, he's projected at 46 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.1 times value. He's 9,000 DraftKings salary, 200 more on FanDuel. You know Vegas thinks there's going to be 237.5 points scored in this game. I think this is a great game to stack. And Anthony Edwards has scored 52, 52, and 71 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 37, 37, and 40 minutes. And Anthony Edwards has scored 57, 46, and 53 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Grizzlies. So I like Anthony Edwards here versus the Memphis Grizzlies. Okay, another small forward that I like. Actually, that's the only one. We gave you the other ones at the shooting guard position. So moving on to the power forward position, I like Evan Mobley from the Cleveland Cavaliers playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 7th worst defense overall, give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Evan Mobley has averaged 33.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. Now, he's projected at 32.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's 6,800 DraftKings salary, 500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 222.5 points scored in this game. And Evan Mobley has scored 44, 30, and 52 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 33, 37, and 37 minutes. And he scored 42, 41, and 31 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. So I like Evan Mobley. Now, he is on a back-to-back, so let's go ahead and check his scoring log and see. So he played 36 minutes versus the Warriors, 37 minutes versus the Bucks on a back-to-back. So it looks like he's going to be just fine here on back-to-backs. Let's just go ahead and move on to our next pick.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, now if you're looking for a high-risk, high-reward sleeper pick here, we have no idea how many minutes he's going to play this game, but for the last 3 games, it's been pretty consistent. So take a look at Chris Boucher from the Toronto Raptors playing the Golden State Warriors, who have the 8th worst defense overall, middle of the pack defending opposing power forwards. Chris Boucher is averaging 20.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 20 minutes per game with an 18% usage rate. He's projected at 18.4 fantasy points here tonight, and that's 5.1 times value. So even if he scores under his season average, he can get you over 5 times value at only 3,600 DraftKings salary, Now he is $1,500 more on FanDuel, so I love this DraftKings price. Probably a DraftKings play for me only. Chris Boucher has scored 33, 29, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 22, 23, and 19 minutes. And he's got a good track record here versus the Warriors. He scored 30, 25, 16, 32, and 38 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Warriors. So I like Chris Boucher as a high-risk, high-reward value play here versus the Golden State Warriors. Okay, moving on to the center position. So a couple players that I like. They're not my favorite centers on the slate, but I do like them. I like Bam Adebayo here for the Miami Heat playing the Orlando Magic. It's a pretty good matchup here, and Bam Adebayo has scored 56, 35, and 38 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 37, 34, and 34 minutes, averaging 42.2 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 35 minutes per game. Now, let's assume here he scores his season average. Let's just call it 43 fantasy points. Let's see what that would be. That would be 5.1 times value. So if he scores his season average of 42.2, it'd probably be about 5 times value. So he's $8,400 DraftKings salary, $600 more on FanDuel. So I like Bam Adebayo. His last game versus the Magic scored 39 fantasy points. And Bam has had 250-plus fantasy point performances here in the last 5 games. He's got a 43 in there as well. So he's been playing pretty well. So I like Bam Adebayo here versus the Orlando Magic. Now keep an eye on this injury with Miles Turner. If he's good to go here tonight, he's an interesting play because Miles Turner has averaged 35.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. And he scored 46, 38, and 46 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 33, 32, and 36 minutes. So he's projected at 33.3 fantasy points here tonight, a little bit under his season average, probably because he's questionable, unsure if he's going to play his full amount of minutes. So that's 4.7 times value. He's $7,100 DraftKings salary, $900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 238 points scored in this game. Now I like this pick because Miles Turner has scored 53 and 37 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Bucks, but he is questionable, so keep an eye on that injury news. And if it's too risky, just go ahead and pass. The other center that I like, even though he is on a back-to-back, actually I already gave you Evan Mobley at the power forward position, sorry about that. The other center that I like, yes, and he also is on a back-to-back, I like Jared Allen from the Cleveland Cavaliers playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 7th worst defense overall, give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Jared Allen has averaged 32.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 16% usage rate. He's projected at 30.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's $6,000 DraftKings salary, $1,700 more on FanDuel. This is a DraftKings play for me. I love that DraftKings price. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 222.5 points scored in this game. Jarrett Allen has scored 35, 43, and 28 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 34, 38, and 27 minutes. So I like this pick because he scored 41, 40, 31, and 56 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Thunder. Now it is a back-to-back, so let's see if we can take a look here. He played 31 minutes versus the Warriors, then 27 minutes the next night versus the Bucks. So it looks like he should be good to go. They might shave him a couple of minutes here, though. Let's see if we can find one more game. The Pacers here, and then he played the Mavericks. So he played the Pacers 38 minutes, Then the next night played the Mavericks 39 minutes. So I think he is going to be just fine with minutes, even though he is on a back-to-back. He's only $6,000 DraftKings salary. So I think that helps alleviate the risk of the back-to-back. It's a great matchup. He's been playing well, been playing a lot of minutes. I think he could hit value in 30 minutes anyways. So I like Jarrett Allen here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.